What was the aftermath like for you? How did you process the attacks?
Oh, I think I'm still trying to process it. I mean, I don't know if you can. But I ended up back in the studio after a day or so, and I just started doing these little drawings. Whatever I'd been working on wasn't important anymore. I put it aside, and I just started doing these little doodles. And, sometimes ideas come to you in a flash, and I had a flash of like, okay, I'm going to make one drawing for everyone.
From the 9/11 Memorial Museum, this is Our City, Our Story, a series where New Yorkers talk about their city and how September 11th changed that. I'm Will Thwaites.
And would you mind introducing yourself for me?
I'm Manju Shandler.
Okay, so Manju Shandler. She's an artist based here in New York City.
So my very first apartment was on 26th Street and 7th Avenue across from FIT.
And on the morning of September 11th, the way she first found out about the attacks was pretty typical for a New Yorker.
Someone stopped me on the street and said, do you know a plane flew into the World Trade Center?
But as you'll hear, the way that Shandler, as an artist, responded to the attacks, that was anything but typical. Her response was swift and extraordinary. My co-host Jenny Pachuki sat down to interview Manju Shandler about art, September 11th, and New York.
Did you like living in the city right away, or did it take a while?
No, I always loved it. I love everything about it, except for when I don't. But most of the time, I love it. I love the people. I love the energy. I love the infinite possibility. I love how anonymous you can be, or how you can run into people you know all the time. I think you make the city into the kind of smaller, larger town that you can handle at that moment.
So, in a minute, we'll talk about the artwork that Shandler made in response to 9/11. But first, let's go back with her to that day. Here's my co-host Jenny Pachuki again, chatting with Shandler.
How did the morning of September 11th, 2001 start for you?
So I was home at 9 a.m., I was walking my dog, and someone stopped me on the street, a very animated woman who was a stranger to me, and said, do you know a plane flew into the World Trade Center? Her energy was a little strange, so it was a little standoffish, and I said, oh, I hope no one was hurt. And she looked at me like I was crazy. She's like, I think a lot of people were killed. And then she saw I wasn't really getting it, and she ran over to a car and stopped traffic in the street and started telling them about it. So that was how I found out. So I finished walking the dog and I fed him, and I turned on the TV and I saw what was happening. Once I turned on the television, I was just watching that. And it's a funny thing because I could have almost been anywhere. It's, a mile, 2 miles? It's not far. But it was there, and it was sort of surreal to think that was just down the road. But when my husband finally got home and we got up the stamina to go outside, it was still a beautiful, clear day outside. But everyone was on the street walking north, and we'd see people covered in dust and stuff. So that's how you could tell that it was close by. And then as the wind changed, you could smell it. And that lasted for weeks.
What was the aftermath like for you? How did you process the attacks?
Oh, I think I'm still trying to process it. I mean, I don't know if you can. But I ended up back in the studio after a day or so, and I just started doing these little drawings. Whatever I'd been working on wasn't important anymore. I put it aside, and I just started doing these little doodles. And, sometimes ideas come to you in a flash, and I had a flash of like, okay, I'm going to make one drawing for everyone. I mean, it was days out, so there was no idea how many people were gone.
Well, and in fact, headlines at the time were reporting 10,000, 6,000.
Six was sort of in my mind. So I realized I better do them quick. I didn't think I didn't know what 6,000 drawings meant. But that was the intention, is just sort of an active response, like physically doing something.
How did you start to create the actual pieces?
So I guess at the beginning, I did them first on paper. I just had some scraps of paper, like little scraps, and I just started drawing on those. And I did 100, 200 or something, and I'm starting to formulate this idea for what I wanted to do. And I hung them up, and they just kind of didn't look that great. They were black on white for the most part. They didn't have the kind of life. If the idea was this is one for everybody. I wanted it to have more depth and richness to it. So I kind of rethought it, and I spoke with some friends at a dinner party or something about my project, and someone said that I could use plastic.
That's great. I love it.
So I went and bought this plastic sheeting, and I happened to buy the clear plastic, which then had to be colored, so then the colors came from that. And it was a great choice because it's very flexible, and there's a lot of potential for different things you could do with it because you're not only marking the surface, but you're coloring the background as well.
Can you talk about the range of emotions that you went through as you created this piece?
I can really tell the first pieces, and I think the viewer could too if they were looking at it. The first pieces, especially in yellow, are so acid. I mean, I don't know why. I just went to the brightest, most primary colors that had the most kind of shocking. So bright yellow background, bright red stick figure hanging underneath the desk, like blue computer, red airplane, that kind of thing. Really stark imagery. And then I think as time progressed over the years, the final stages of this work, I was pregnant and then I had my new baby, and I think I had sort of, there's a sense of rebirth, obviously, both literally for me. And the color palette changed to like sort of more ochres and earth tones and something kind of about a little bit more peaceful and spiritual, I hope. And I felt like that's where I was coming from. And to have those two things next to each other, I think is important, to have both.
For the months and years after September 11th, Shandler worked on these paintings until she had close to 3,000 of them, one for each person that was lost in the attacks. They would ultimately be displayed not individually, but as one giant art installation called Gesture. Okay, my description won't do it justice, but picture thousands of 4-inch by 9-inch paintings hung in neat rows and columns on a white wall. Some of the paintings are of iconic images from the news, things like firefighters carrying bodies out of the rubble. But then others are more abstract, kind of like Shandler was using shapes and patterns to capture emotions.
Did this process feel cathartic to you at times at all?
Definitely. Yeah, for sure. I think it was sort of a therapy in a way. It's a way to kind of shed it.
Did you know other artists who were responding to September 11th in a similar way that you were, working through it through art?
I think almost everyone was doing something. I mean, I hope so. That's sort of our job as artists, is to respond to the world, right? To help people respond and to help people see things in a different light.
A lot of artists from New York felt the same way Shandler did, that it was their responsibility to respond to these terror attacks. And they did so by making some really powerful pieces of art. Here at the 9/11 Memorial Museum, we had a special exhibition highlighting such works from 13 New York City artists. It was called Rendering the Unthinkable. And in addition to pieces from Eric Fischl and the Blue Man Group, we featured Gesture, the installation that Shandler made.
And we ended up asking you to select 850, am I right?
Yes.
850 paintings to be on view in our space. What's it like for you when you were selecting the pieces? Is it hard for you to break the piece up?
Not really. I mean, I try to be not too precious about it and honor the fact of what it is, which is some pieces are stronger than others. This certainly, I worked in series, so there's plenty of repeats. So I just sort of opened the book and started hanging things up, and I'd look at it and move things around, and then I'd flip through the books and be like, oh, this piece and this piece are similar, but I think this one's a little bit better, and I switched it out. It wasn't like a hard process for me to like, oh, I can't include this one or that one. I mean, I just wanted to have a sort of a fair cross-section of what the piece is like.
Are there specific paintings that are more personal to you in different ways?
I love all my children. People always ask that, and I can't I can't say. I have a few favorites that I feel like in like sort of a formal, distanced way. Like I feel like it worked. Like the formula kind of, it all came together in a synergy. But that wasn't really my concern. In a way, it was more the sum of the parts. While I was absolutely concerned about doing something one for one, the focus moved in a way from my outward experience and shock and horror and trauma of witnessing this death to thinking about those individuals' experience, but also kind of drawing back a little bit and then thinking about their loved ones that were left and the people in the city who's witnessed it, and then the ramifications to the rest of the world. And it just kept coming, my focus would go into that moment and into that experience and then out to all the other things that have been affected and changed. I mean, the world is really different now. We're still feeling it.
I think the most interesting thing about Shandler's piece is that it operates on a couple of different wavelengths. I mean, figuratively, each of the almost 3,000 paintings represents one individual that died in the attacks. But then literally, some of the paintings are of these iconic images that we all remember from the coverage of 9/11. Visuals that, when we see them, take us right back to that day. And so Shandler's piece is sort of an amalgamation of all our memories. The memories of those who were lost, and then the memories of how that time period looked and felt.
I'm always interested in people's idea of collective memory and collective memory of the attacks. And were you thinking about that as you put together this piece? And what do you think about that?
Collective memory is really important and what distinguishes us as a species. Right? I mean, the fact that we record and that we can hopefully learn and progress from people before us and that we can distill that information to other people. I think that's what's incredible about the museum. Now my children are getting to be teenagers, and the fact that they will be able to come here and in some way relive the experience that so many people had, I think will be important for keeping the memory alive. And also so that they can have the same kind of empathetic response that we all did, being here and living through it.
From the 9/11 Memorial Museum, this is Our City, Our Story. I'm Will Thwaites. I host and produce the series alongside Jenny Pachuki. This episode was also produced by Elizabeth Bistro and written by me, Will Thwaites. Our executive producers are Michael Frazier and Carl Cricco. Sound editing is done by Sam Behrens. If you want to stay connected to the show, Our City, Our Story, subscribe on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And thanks as always for listening.